introduce our speaker for this morning. So Jared Eaton is a K-20 rabbinic intern at Simchat Israel in New Haven, Connecticut, and he is really an amazing speaker. And to read his commentaries on the Torah portions has been inspiring for me as a rabbi to read what he's doing as an intern. And so please join me in giving a huge, warm welcome to Jared Eaton.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Well, is this a great service or what? It's amazing. I think we should all put our hands together for this amazing worship team that put together. Awesome musicians, great cantors, all people read from the Torah today, and there's some guys back there working very hard behind that curtain. So please give a round of applause to those guys. I'd like to thank Josh for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to the UMJC board for inviting me here to speak with you on this beautiful California Shabbat morning. I'm from New England, man. We don't get a lot of nice days up there. It's nice coming to California. It is an honor. It's a simcha for me to be here with you today. Now, many of you may not know me, but you might be familiar with my father with the phone over there. Put that phone away.
Ingrid said
my father was Rabbi Tony Eaton, who has served the UMJC faithfully and has been the spiritual leader of Congregation Simchat Israel in Connecticut for 30 years. I want to introduce one more person here. So I'm traveling here with my son, John. John, why don't you come up here and say hello to everybody?
Hey, John.
So unfortunately, I only have one of my kids here today. I've had to leave my beautiful wife, Ingrid, and my other two babies, Robert and Noah, at home. John, why do you think we had to leave Robert at home?
Because he would cry the plane ride and all night.
Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't make that happen. I'm pretty sure a 6-hour plane ride with 2 babies is a war crime. So this is my son John. He's super excited to be here. He wants to be the next rabbi at Simchat Israel. So I am currently the assistant congregational leader at our temple. And over the last several years, I've been gradually moving into full-time leadership as I pursue my rabbinic education. I should give a plug to the King's University and MJTI right now. If you're interested in your rabbinic education, you can find no better places in Messianic Judaism. So slowly, over the course of several years, Rabbi Tony has shifted more of his responsibility and authority to me, not only to allow me to get used to it, but we're hoping that by the time he's fully retired and I'm fully in charge, the congregation will hopefully have barely noticed the transition. So I guess the best way to describe the relationship, if I could think of a metaphor for this, if our temple was like a collection of great scientists, Rabbi Tony would be like, he'd be like Albert Einstein, and I would be like Rick Moranis from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I'm the mad scientist of the group that like blows up the entire synagogue one day. And I joke, but as an up-and-coming leader, I can tell you that it can be very difficult, even intimidating, to be in the shadow of someone who's been around as long as Rabbi Tony has. See, my list of achievements is far shorter and less impressive. In my moments of doubt, I wonder if my community will truly accept me as a leader, and if I'm equal to the task ahead of me. And I wonder if I'm not alone in feeling this way. I look around this room today, and there's some amazing people there. I see Josh Rubenstein. I see Seth Klayman. I see David Wine, Aaron Allsbrook, Josh Brunbach, all these amazing, dynamic, young leaders. And they all have one thing in common. They are all men who are stepping into some very big shoes. We were talking about some of these big shoes all conference long. This conference has been a celebration of the pioneers who blazed trails before us, men and women who had a dream of a Judaism with Yeshua as its foundation, and they stepped bravely into this uncharted territory. These are visionaries who built our movement from the ground up with no blueprint. But even as we reflect on our past, we're always looking ahead to our future. And the future at times can seem very, very uncertain. Many of our beloved pioneers are retiring, moving on to different ministries. Leaders who have shepherded their congregations for decades are now looking to leave their roles, oftentimes either with no one to take up their mantle, or with a successor who has yet to prove himself. The Messianic movement is at a critical stage in its development. As we celebrate our 40-year anniversary, the UMJC is coming to the end of one generation and to the beginning of a new one. Now is the moment where we find out will we continue to march boldly along the trails blazed by our pioneers, or will we fade away until we are a mere footnote in history books? In the face of such uncertainty, with the stakes as high as they are, how can we look forward into the future with confidence? I think we can take comfort knowing that we are not the first to wrestle with these questions. In our Torah portion, we find Moses at the twilight of his career. For 40 long years, Moses has led his people through every imaginable trial, through drought and plague, through rebellion and war. Moses has faced every obstacle, and with the help of Hashem, he has overcome them all.
Yes, Lord.
But now, Moses' long life is drawn to an end. But before he can rest, he has a difficult decision to make. Who will lead the Jewish people when he's gone? Perhaps it will be Pinchas, his great nephew, who in this week's Parsha zealously defends the honor of God and saves the nation of Israel. Or perhaps Moses will choose to pass leadership on to Gershom, his own son, whom he groomed all his life to follow God. Or perhaps he'll choose Caleb, the daring explorer, who alone, when faced with fearsome giants, had the courage to know that Israel could not fail to take the promised land. Who will he choose? In the end, Moses did not choose any of these men to lead. Indeed, he didn't make the choice at all. Rather than Pinchas, or Gershom, or Caleb, God himself chose Joshua, the son of Nun, the most unlikely candidate to lead the children of Israel. Friends, today, I'd like to take a closer look at the life of Joshua ben Nun. Because if any young leader ever had big shoes to fill, it was him, right? And I think as we explore Joshua, we will discover the key to being able to have confidence in the future of our leadership. Should I be using this microphone?
Yes.
So let's dive in, shall we?
Now, here's the thing about Joshua. Ooh, that is better.
Oh, not for us.
Yes?
No.
You know what was better?
All right, everyone raise your hand.
There
if
we
you'd
go.
like.
All right, it's now it's working. All right, you're good.
I don't get the difference part. Okay.
All right, let's dive into Torah. We're not going to worry about microphones. Here's the thing about Joshua. If you were to just read his book on its own, you would probably assume that Joshua was some kind of superhero. You know, I read through this book, and the Tanakh has nothing bad to say about this guy. Joshua might be the most wildly successful leader in history. From start to finish, it is a total success story. The book opens with God cutting a covenant of invincibility with Joshua. God tells him, "No one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life." God guarantees victory and success and accomplishment for his entire life. And he keeps that promise. The book of Joshua is filled with landslide victories over every enemy that Israel faces. Joshua doesn't even need to do anything. God does the fighting for him. He sends the commander of his angelic armies to fight alongside Israel. God causes the walls of Jericho to fall down, and he rains boulders from heaven on Israel's enemies. He causes the sun to stand still so the enemies can't flee in the night. He parts the waters of the Jordan River so the armies can pass through on dry land. If this is a video game, Joshua is playing on God mode. And if you can stomach the violence, the book of Joshua might be the most optimistic book of the Tanakh. In contrast to the generations that would come before and after them, Joshua's generation is remarkably faithful to God. Joshua doesn't have to deal with any of the rebellion and the grumbling that Moses did. Israel is loyal to God, and they listen to Joshua, and they get along with each other perfectly, and they're rewarded for it with victory over their enemies and a peaceful and easy settlement in the land. This book has a very happy ending, with the Jews living peacefully in the land and the entire nation promising Joshua that they will serve God faithfully. This guy is a superhero. He's perfect. I can't look at this guy. Through the whole book, Joshua never makes a single mistake. He has no flaws, no faults, no failings, nothing for me to pick apart. It's kind of hard for me to even try to live up to that, right? He has no flaws. Or does he? See, Joshua may be a superhero, but all superheroes have origins. Yeah, see, Spider-Man, he might be able to sling webs and climb walls, but before he was bitten by a radioactive spider, he was just like a skinny nerd, right? And Captain America, he may have single-handedly won World War II, but before he was given super soldier serum, he was just like the skinny nerd, right? And the Hulk, he may be the world's strongest hero, but before he was caught in a gamma explosion, he was also a skinny nerd. Marvel Comics seems to have some originality here. The point is, maybe Joshua wasn't always the superhero we see in his book. Today, I want to take a look back into Torah and look at Joshua before he was a mighty hero. Back when he was a skinny nerd, learning how to be a leader. I want to dive into Joshua's origin story and see how his flaws and his weaknesses didn't hold him back, but instead transformed him into one of the greatest leaders in Jewish history. And maybe we find out how his example can be an encouragement to us today. So if you have your Bibles with you, or you have your Bible app on your phone, you can open up to Exodus 17. And if you don't have that, don't worry, I got you covered on the slides here. So we can open up to Exodus 17, and we're going to meet Joshua for the very first time in the Bible. So, what do we know about Joshua? Initially, not very much. We first meet Joshua when Moses commissions him to lead a force of fighting men against the tribe of Amalek. Joshua doesn't receive any kind of introduction here. He's just thrust into the story as if we already know who he is. Much later on in the Bible, in the book of Chronicles, we find out that Joshua is the grandson of Elishama, who was the leader of the tribe of Ephraim. But the Torah seems to intentionally omit this detail. And I think it's because it wants us to focus on Joshua's personality and character, and not on his pedigree. So what do we know about his character? Now, if we're going by the nearly superhuman way he's portrayed in his book, you would think that Joshua must have been just the perfect disciple to Moses. He must have been wise, brave, and a great leader, right? That's what you'd think. That's not what we find out. Let's jump to Exodus 32. This is Joshua's second appearance and the first time that he speaks in the Bible. So this is Joshua's big moment. We're finally going to learn something about him from his own mouth. Now, you're all very familiar with this story. Moses has gone up to the top of Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. He's been gone for 40 days, and while he was away, the children of Israel had made themselves a golden calf to worship. Nice work, guys. So God tells Moses what's going on, and Moses runs down to deal with the situation. So on the way down the mountain, he meets Joshua, who has come up the mountain with him, but Joshua didn't ascend all the way to the top. Joshua has been waiting for his master to return, and when he sees him, Joshua, he runs up and he's like, Moses, do you hear that? There's a great cry coming from the camp. It's the sound of war. Our people are under attack. Moses says, all right, first of all, calm down. That's not the sound of war. It's the sound of singing. Now, think about this. This is pretty remarkable. Joshua, this guy who goes on to become one of the most successful leaders ever, the first time he speaks in Torah, he's wrong. He speaks before his master, and he has to be corrected. It's a strange introduction for a great leader. So hold on to that. Let's keep that in mind. Let's go on and see his next appearance. So in the next chapter, which is Exodus 33, we find out how God communicates with the people of Israel. Moses has this tent that he goes in to talk with God. And since Joshua was his disciple, Moses brings Joshua into the tent with him. God talks to Moses in the tent, and then Moses goes out of the tent, and he tells the people what God told him. So the strange thing we read here is that when Moses would go out to talk to the people, Joshua would stay in the tent. It seems like Joshua is more observing Moses' leadership than doing any leading himself. He gets to see Moses in action, and he sees him in action with God and with the people, but Joshua himself seems very secluded. God doesn't speak directly to him, and Joshua doesn't speak directly to the people. We don't really get a sense that Joshua is connecting very well to the people here. All right, now let's jump one more place to Numbers 11:28, Joshua's next appearance, and the second time he talks in Torah. This time, the situation is that Moses has appointed elders, and two of them are prophesying in the camp. So when he hears about this, Joshua gets really upset, and he runs to Moses and he says, Moses, these guys, they're prophesying, and they're doing about your permission, and you gotta stop them, about it. So, but Moses says, first of all, calm down. Leave them alone. Why are you angry on my account? I wish that God would put his spirit on the entire camp. Pretty incredible, right? The second time Joshua speaks in Torah, he's wrong. He once again speaks before his master, and once again he has to be corrected. This is an interesting picture the Torah is painting of Joshua. So far, he's got a pretty bad track record. And the Midrash picks up on this. You know, in Kohelet Rabbah, I couldn't find it. I'm sorry. So in Kohelet Rabbah, the rabbis of the Talmud are worried that the man who will one day lead a nation of 600,000 people, who will be both a military and a religious leader, can't distinguish between the sound of war and the sound of worship. They're concerned that Joshua isn't spending time among the people, and he isn't relating to them well, and they're worried that he is not spiritually mature enough for the job. And it just gets worse. Joshua's next and probably most famous appearance in Torah is the disastrous incident of the 12 spies and the bad report. So Joshua is selected to be one of the 12 men who goes into Canaan to spy out the land, along with his friend Caleb. But when they come back, the spies tell everyone that the Canaanites are too strong, and they will stand no chance in a fight against them. And the people all start panicking, and then look what happens. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should definitely go up and capture the land, but we can certainly do it. It's Caleb, not Joshua, the next leader of Israel, who speaks up. At this moment, Joshua is silent. You know, in the next chapter, Joshua finally speaks up and tries to encourage the people, but by then it's too late. God is already furious with them, and the people just want to stone Caleb and Joshua. Maybe if he had spoken up earlier, Joshua could have changed things, but he doesn't. He just stayed quiet. Now, the Torah doesn't tell us why Joshua is silent, but in the Talmud, the Ramban speculates that Joshua was initially silent because he wasn't sure whose side he was on. Eventually he would come around and trust God, but he was scared of the giants too. Moses seems to understand that there is this deep sense of fear residing in Joshua. Look at the way Moses speaks to Joshua when he's passing on his authority to him. He calls Joshua to him and tells him, be strong, be courageous, chazak. Don't be afraid or discouraged. But then God gets in on the act. God commissions Joshua with leadership, but he tells Joshua over and over again, 4 times in one chapter, Joshua, chazak, be brave, be strong, don't be afraid. And then even the people of Israel get in on Joshua's case. They accept his leadership, but they tell him, we'll do what you say, Joshua. Just be strong and courageous, please. Everyone seems worried that Joshua isn't going to be brave. You know, why would they tell him over and over again otherwise? This does not bode well for Joshua. It makes sense that Moses and God would tell him to be strong. But when the people have to tell their leader to be brave and to be strong, do they really have confidence that Joshua can lead them? The Talmud doesn't seem to think so. The Midrash teaches that when Moses died, the elders of that generation lamented, "Alas, Moses' face is like the sun, and Joshua's is like the moon." Yeah, the moon is just a pale reflection of the sun. How will Joshua lead the nation when he's just a pale reflection of Moses? So as the Torah comes to a close, we're left with a pretty grim situation. For all of his greatness, Moses always struggled to lead the children of Israel. They questioned his every decision. They didn't trust him. They rebelled against him and God time and again. And now Moses is gone. And it's up to Joshua to not only lead the people, but to lead them into the promised land and into war and all the difficulties that comes with that. And Joshua isn't the leader that Moses was. Moses was the sun. Joshua is just the moon. He seems to have everything working against him. Then we turn the page to the book of Joshua, and we see that the opposite is true. Joshua is a wildly successful leader. And more than that, the stiff-necked grumblers of Moses' day seem to have transformed into a nearly perfect generation. Throughout the book of Joshua, the people virtually never sin. What's even more amazing, these people never complained to Joshua. Jews did not complain. The same people who made Moses tear his beard out with their whining, they never complained. Is this even the same group of people? It's astounding. Even when Israel suffers its one and only defeat, even then, they don't come running to Joshua complaining. What happened? We just saw that Joshua had all these flaws. How is it that he is not only an effective leader, but an even more effective leader than Moses? The story of the Jewish people has always been the story of how God uses the most unlikely people to do the greatest things. There were plenty of other candidates to take over from Moses. God chose Joshua because he knew that he could transform Joshua's weaknesses into his greatest strengths. Maybe the reason the people never come running to Joshua, the reason they display such confidence in him, is because they can trust that Joshua understands their fears and their concerns because he feels them too. Let's look back at that incident with the spies. I'll show you what I mean. When the spies bring back a bad report, Israel basically divides into factions. Moses and Caleb are firmly on one side of taking the land. The 10 bad spies, and presumably the rest of Israel, were on the side of staying right where they were. There was only one person who didn't take sides. That was Joshua. He didn't leap to Moses' defense or throw in his hat with the bad spies. Instead, he listens to both sides. He takes both arguments into account. And after bringing it to God in prayer, he decides to trust in God's promise. Joshua is a man who can stand in both worlds. He feels the fear of the people, but he also has the powerful faith of Moses. And he can combine those traits and become a man who understands fear, but doesn't allow it to rule him. This is what makes him such a great leader. We see this style of leadership again after the failed battle at Ai. You would think that this would be the point where the people would come running to Joshua and say, "Get us out of here! How can we ever be able to beat the Canaanites if we can't even win against a tiny city?" But they don't get a chance to, because Joshua beats them to it. Before they even have a chance to grumble, Joshua is already on his face before God, asking for help. Let's look at this prayer. Joshua says, "Alas, Adonai Elohim, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan? Is it to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites? To destroy us? If only we had been content and dwelled beyond the Jordan." Does this sound familiar? Yeah, who does Joshua sound like here? Sounds a lot like the children of Israel after the spies, doesn't he? He uses the same words and expresses the same fears that they do when they're afraid. But then Joshua continues. He pulls himself together and he says, "Oh my Lord, what can I say now that Israel has turned its back before its enemies? For when the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land hear of it, they will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And then what will you do for your great name?" All right, now who does he sound like? He sounds just like Moses, right? Pleading with God to remain with his people after they sinned. Joshua is a man who stands in both worlds. He understands both the people and Moses. He can sympathize with Israel, share in their anxiety and concerns, but he also has the same powerful faith as Moses, and he can bring those fears and lay them at God's feet. The children of Israel don't have to complain to Joshua because they know that he's worried about the same things that they are, and he's taking care of them. They trust Joshua and are willing to follow him because Joshua is one of them, and they know that he has their back. When the Talmud says that Moses is the sun and Joshua is the moon, yes, that means that Joshua is in some ways less than Moses. The thing is, you can't look at the sun. You can look at the moon. Joshua was accessible and relatable to people in ways that Moses never was. See, Moses spoke to God face to face as a man talks to his friend. Moses' face shone so brightly that the people couldn't even stand to look at him. He had to wear a veil when he was around them. No wonder people couldn't relate to him. Moses was a man who stood with both of his feet in heaven. The rest of Israel still had their feet down on earth. But Joshua, he had one foot in heaven and the other down on earth. He had a powerful faith in God and a deep connection with his people. And because he understood and lived in both of those worlds, he was able to lead his people into God's promise. I use this image of Joshua with one foot in heaven and the other on the ground, not only because it's a useful metaphor, but because this image is confirmed in Scripture. The book of Joshua spends a lot of time portraying Joshua as the new Moses. There are striking similarities between their lives, but there are also subtle differences. We all know the story of Moses at the burning bush. When he approached, God told Moses, "Come no closer. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Joshua had a similar experience. When he encountered the commander of God's army, the angel told him, "Take your sandal off your foot. The place where you are standing is holy." It sounds the same, but the difference that the rabbis point out is that Joshua was told to remove only one sandal. In the Bible, the wearing of shoes is meant to represent our connection to our human nature. That's why we say the Kedusha, and we rise up off our feet to symbolize our breaking away from our bodies to enter into heaven. And when Moses stood before God, he took off both of his sandals because Moses lived completely in God's world. He stood with both feet in heaven. But God told Joshua, "Leave one sandal on. You're going to need it." When I read the book of Joshua, I'm encouraged as a young leader. I think that our Messianic congregations can be encouraged as well. I believe that our young Messianic leaders have a special calling from God. That we are here in the roles that we are in because God has a purpose and a mission for us. And though we may be different from the men who came before us, just as Joshua was different from Moses, God will still use both our strengths and our weaknesses for something glorious. The generation that came before us, they were pioneers, beating new paths into uncharted territory. Our generation are settlers. Our mission is to live peacefully and abundantly in the world that our fathers pioneered for us. So I have a message for our young leaders right now. I encourage you to embrace who you are. Have confidence in yourself and in your style of leadership. And to our congregations, support and encourage your new leaders. They will be different from the men who came before them, but give them room to grow and to learn. And I am confident God will do great things with us. And for all of us together, I encourage us all to follow the example of Joshua. And even as we grow closer to God, never forget to leave one sandal on. We should never become so holy that we lose the ability to reach out and relate to and understand and love other people. As we follow the example of Messiah Yeshua, we should always remember that light shines brighter out in the open, and our feet can walk the path of righteousness better with one foot on the ground. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much.